There's only one person to talk to about that and university struggles. Chris McGovern is the chairman of the Campaign for Real Education and a man who talks sense. Christopher, good afternoon, my friend. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you very much for inviting me on the show.
Oh, God. Let's start with the UK universities. So we saw this, Chris, last week. US universities, it was quite interesting. They were sort of quite entitled universities, Columbia and Yale. And these sort of, these students whose parents pay $100,000 a year to send them to the best universities were all up in arms, wearing pro-Palestinian hats and T-shirts and flags. And they'd set up a siege at one particular university. And then there was, I don't know if you saw, this dreadful woman came out, she's 25, and said, it's like we need humanitarian aid in there. It's like a siege. And everybody's going, well, phone Uber Eats. It seems today the same is happening. Encampments, Chris, have been set up in Oxford and Cambridge. They won't move until their demands are met. My question to you is this the younger generation caring about what they're seeing in Gaza or hijacking the latest political whatever story for their own ends? What are your thoughts, my friend?
Well, I've spoken about the herd mentality, and that's certainly part of it. But look, Jeremy, there are a minority of students doing this. I feel quite sorry, actually, for the majority of students who have suffered from the COVID lockdown, that suffered from lecturers' strikes, great disruption to their studies, and they're paying a lot in fees and have to pay it back. And they've got exams coming up, you know, and what's going to happen next, of course, is that those exams will be disrupted. So ordinary Joe Blogg students, fine, they want to get on with their lives. Here we have these quite entitled people who weren't, I noticed, complaining after the initial Hamas attack. They've come out later. Now, look, they've got a right to protest if they want to, and one understands the great suffering taking place in that area of the world. But what they mustn't do is hit ordinary students who want to go about their business, sit their exams and have a life.
I think that's a really interesting point. I don't want to go into too much detail, but my daughter is at university and she was talking about this with me this morning, and you start to think, don't you, exactly what you just said. Are you going to feel like you need to be dragged in? I'm going to use an example which will go down like a lead balloon and will lead to people phoning up. But do you remember when Thatcher decided that unions were too strong in this country? There was a thing called the clothes shop. I'm sure people know about it. But basically, you know, the left-wing shop steward put his hand up and everybody went on strike. And if you dared to not agree, you know, have a brick through your window and your wife would be abused on the way to the school with the kids. And she bought in the clothes shop, which meant you went in and you voted whether you wanted to strike. And strikes dropped massively. And I wonder with students, the point you've made is whether students who aren't wanting to jump on this bandwagon and just study for the reasons that they're there for are going to feel pressurised, they're going to be ostracised, and as you said, it's going to affect their exam results.
Yeah, there is coercion, and although some students will deny that, there's undoubtedly coercion. And sometimes it's just passive, it's just alienating people who don't join in. Look, we had all this years ago, just under Thatcher, and before that, students did feel intimidated. The Vietnam War in America in particular, a lot of student agitation there, but not necessarily a majority. And yeah, I feel concerned that, you know, many, often kids from poorer backgrounds, who are really in debt. They want to get on and get a job and finish their degree, and it's going to be disrupted. And as I say, you know, they've had a pretty tough time, this generation of students. So there is coercion, and it's very selective. It's sort of telescopic philanthropy, telescopic virtue. It's because it's in a long way away, you can sort of be concerned about it, but there are other places a long way away. What about the Sudan? Pretty awful there. What about China? What about the Uyghurs? But this is selective. Yet we do feel for the people of Palestine, just as we feel for the people of Israel. But there are a lot of other places in the world. But why are they selecting this one? This is the fashionable cause. And so, okay,
that's the word, isn't it? And you started, Chris, what you said, which I thought was excellent, wasn't it? You can't have this debate with people. I don't remember encampments on universities when 1,400 innocent Jews were massacred by terrorists like that. I hate what I'm seeing in Gaza. There's a part of me that says, unfortunately, that's war and it's not a nice thing. But you're right when you say these fashionable causes, students, entitled students, you know, class problem. I mean, the thing in America is really interesting. When the semester ends, they'll all go back to the Hamptons and go water skiing with mummy and daddy. And 2 months later, if it's still going on, they'll come back and put their T-shirt on and start jumping up and down again. So I get students want to have an opinion, but I'd sort of like it to be more organic and not because, as you said, it's the herd mentality. Can I bring you on to the other story? Only a man who speaks common sense like you. I read this over the weekend. taxpayers in the northeast, and my favourite part of the country, Northumberland, God's country, are funding a £475 a day expert, I don't know how you can be an expert, to decolonise parts of Hadrian's Wall, because he needs to decolonise a brick wall so he can apologise for Britain's past. And that's costing the taxpayer in the northeast over £100,000 a year, Chris McGovern. I'd love your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm a historian, and also I plead guilty to writing 3 of the government's national curriculums, all of which I objected to. So this is. I also lived and worked in Tyneside, so that's close to my heart. And I think, Tyne and Wear Museums Authority are getting on the National Trust bandwagon. The National Trust has said we've got to point out that many of our properties are linked to slavery. Now, let me remind you and the National Trust and Tyne and Wear that the Hadrian's Wall is a monument to slavery and colonisation and imperial power of the Brits. We were enslaved. And in the news in the last actually few weeks, there's been a story from Carlisle which points out that the emperor, an African emperor, Septimius Severus, was in Carlisle. They've now got the proof of that. And Septimius Severus launched a campaign north of Hadrian's Wall to keep down the Picts, as they were called, the Caledonians. When he got back to York, they rebelled against him. So he called for the total execution, murder, genocide of everybody north of Hadrian's Wall. He died in York before he could carry that out. But these were not nice people coming up to Britain. They were colonising the British, and they were exterminating the British. They were enslaving the British. And how on earth the National Trust cannot include on their sites, which are supposed to be linked to slavery, Hadrian's Wall? They run part of Hadrian's Wall, but the National Trust does not say Housesteads on Hadrian's Wall was associated with imperialism, but it wasn't British imperialism. And I think what we've got here, Jeremy, is that in Tyne and Wear, the Museums Authority, they're so confused. They are part of the woke empire. We were part of the Roman Empire. Yeah. There are lots of empires around. They are totally submerged by wokeism. It's completely mad. We need to fight back.
It's really interesting because we were saying earlier, you said it about the students. It's like it's fashionable. I want to say this to you because you and I are on the same wavelength, and some people will agree and some will different. But I get that a younger generation or other people have different opinions, and woke is woke. Listen, that's fine. But if you're not that way, if you have, which this station is about, right, which is common sense, right, not only they won't listen to your opinion, you're ostracised, you're racist, you're homophobic, you're misogynistic. I don't get it. I've never got that. Debate, democracy, fantastic. Free speech, absolutely. But not two sides. Like we're talking about the students. They would not talk about October the 7th. Anything to do with the National Trust. It's beyond me. I don't understand why we've gone one way. I'm all for a democracy and open-mindedness, but it seems to me, Chris McGovern, we've got to a point where anybody who doesn't agree with whatever the latest woke theory is just ostracised, mentally, physically, verbally, in whichever way.
Yeah, Churchill called these followers of mass movement, he was referring to the Nazis, of course, but it can be referred to what's going on in the world today. He called them carnivorous sheep. They're carnivorous, they can be quite violent, quite difficult, and they follow the leader. It takes people who are courageous to stand up. We need politicians who are courageous, and they're not with all the party politics, but we have individuals in parties who are courageous. We had Frank Field a week or so ago who died. I met Frank Field, and I was with him 1 or 2 times. A great man, not of my persuasion politically, but a great man. Yeah. More recently, we've had Suella Braverman making various statements. Now, they are controversial. We need people to stand up and say no. Most of all, we need political leaders to have the backbone and the courage sometimes to say no and to criticise what is obviously rubbish. And this woke imperialism has to be confronted. There will be some, I'm sure. There will be some. And then we're going to have the martyrs, of course. And so it's going to get nasty. But I think we're heading for a sort of clash of civilizations, a clash of different philosophies in our world, in America too. And, we have to stand up and confront the people who have this sort of, they're possessed by this woke mentality. It is quite dangerous. Some of them are well-meaning, of course. They write to me sometimes. They condemn me. They're not holding their views. They're not all bad, and the path to hell is paved with good intentions.
Listen, it's great. I'm going to make you laugh before you go. My dad is no longer here. They all know that. Chris, the last time I spoke to him in great detail before he died, he wanted to know what woke was, and I went into this great description about what woke meant. And do you know what he said to me? I thought that's what your mother cooked noodles in. Great.
Great. Chris, that's great.
It's true. Chris McGovern, you're always welcome. Thank you very much indeed. Chris McGovern on Talk, the home of common sense, the home of family values. This is JK.